What? Bedwin cupped an ear. Nothing, I said. Does she live? Who knows? No living person goes there, or if they do, they cannot return. But that's where Merlin must have gone, I cried in relief. Merlin had doubtless heard the news from the man he had been whispering with at the back of the courtyard, and Merlin could do what no other man or woman dare do. The Isle of the Dead would hold no terrors for Merlin. What else would have made him vanish so precipitately? In a day or two I thought he would return to Dernovaria with Numui rescued and restored. It had to be thus. Pray God it is, Bedwin said. For her sake. What happened to Sansom? I asked vengefully. He wasn't punished officially, Bedwin said, but Guinevere persuaded Arthur to strip him of Mordred's chaplaincy. And then the old fellow who administered the shrine of the Holy Thorn at Inniswydran died, and I managed to persuade our young bishop to take over there. He wasn't happy, but he knew he'd made too many enemies in Dernovaria, so he accepted. Bedwin was plainly delighted at Sansom's fall. He certainly lost his power here, and I don't see him getting it back. Not unless he's a great deal more subtle than I think. He, of course, is one of those who whisper that Arthur should be sacrificed. Nabur is another. There's a Mordred faction in our kingdom, Derval, and it asks why we should fight to preserve Arthur's life. I stepped round a puddle of vomit thrown up by a drunken soldier come from the hall. The man groaned, looked up at me, then retched again. Who else could rule Dumnonia? I asked Bedwin, when we were safely out of the drunk's hearing. Oh, there's a good question, Derval. Who indeed? Dorfithid, of course, or else his son Keenaglas. Some men whisper Geraint's name, but he doesn't want it. Nabur even suggested I might take over. He said nothing specific, of course, nothing but hints. Bedwin chuckled derisively. But what use would I be against our enemies? We need Arthur. No one else could have held off this ring of enemies for so long, Derval. But folk don't understand that. They blame him for the chaos, yet if anyone else was in power, the chaos would be worse. We're a kingdom without a proper king, so every ambitious rogue has his eye on Mordred's throne. I stopped beside the bronze bust that looked so like Gorfyrthid. If Arthur had just married Cynwyn, I began. Bedwin interrupted me. If, Derval, if. If Mordred's father had lived, or if Arthur had killed Gorfyrthid instead of just taking his arm, everything would be different. History is nothing but ifs. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps if Arthur had married Cynwyn, we would be at peace now, and perhaps Eäl's head would be planted on a spear point in Caercadern. But how long do you think Gorfyrthid would have endured Arthur's success? And remind yourself why Gorfyrthid agreed to the marriage in the first place. For peace, I suggested. Oh, dear me, no. Gorfyrthid only allowed Cynwyn to be betrothed because he believed her son, his grandson, would rule Dumnonia instead of Mordred. I should have thought that was obvious. Not to me, I said. For a Caersus, when Arthur had been struck mad by love, I had been a mere spearman in the guard, not a captain who needed to probe the motives of kings and princes. We need Arthur, Bedwin said, looking up into my eyes. And if Arthur needs Guinevere, then so be it. He shrugged and walked on. I would have preferred Cynwyn as his wife, but the choice and the marriage bed were not mine to make. Now, poor thing, she'll marry Gunlius. Gunlius? I said too loudly, startling the sick soldier, who groaned over his vomit. Cynwyn will marry Gunlius? I asked Bedwin. Their betrothal ceremony is in 2 weeks, Bedwin said calmly, during Lunasa. Lunasa was the summer festival of Chlor, god of light, and was dedicated to fertility, and thus any betrothal made at the feast was considered particularly auspicious. They'll marry in late autumn, after the war. He paused, aware that his last 3 words suggested that Gorfyrthid and Gunlius would win the war, and that the marriage ceremony would thus be a part of the victor's celebrations. Gorfyrthid has sworn to give them Arthur's head as a wedding gift, Bedwin added sadly. But Gundlius is already married, I protested, wondering why I was so indignant. Was it because I remembered Kynwyn's fragile beauty? I still wore her brooch inside my breastplate. But I told myself my indignation was not because of her, but simply because I hated Gundlius. Being married to Ladwis didn't stop Gundlius marrying Norwenna, Bedwin said scornfully. He'll put Ladwis aside, go 3 times round the sacred rock, then kiss the magic toadstool or whatever else you pagans do to get divorced these days. He's not a Christian anymore, by the way. A pagan divorce, marry Kynwyn, serve her with an heir, then hurry back to Ladwis's bed. Well, that seems to be the way of things nowadays. He paused, cocking an ear towards the sounds of laughter coming from the hall. Though maybe, he went on, in years to come we shall think of these days as the last of the good times. Something in his voice made my spirits sink even further. Are we doomed? I asked him. If Ael keeps his truce, we may last another year, but only if we defeat Gorfithid. And if not, then we must pray Merlin has brought us new life. He shrugged, but did not seem very hopeful. He was not a good Christian, Bishop Bedwin, though he was a very good man. Sansom now tells me that Bedwin's goodness will not prevent his soul from roasting in hell. But that summer, fresh back from Bennewick, all our souls seemed doomed to perdition. The harvest was just beginning, but once it was gathered, Gorfithid's onslaught would come.